who are going to come on screen any given moment. And I have the privilege of working with each of these women and getting to know them on a level below the work surface. I've observed them in action, I've admired them in action, and I've wondered on several occasions, like, where does she get that from? Meaning the confidence, the clarity, the resilience, the humility, the ability to navigate really tough stuff and tough jobs, frankly, but while still being human, like while still being a woman, being feminine, and all the great connotations that come with that. And, you know, as I curated the experience for all of you for ElleExcel Leading Ladies, I handpicked these guys and these gals for one good reason, because to me, each of them has, among many, many things, this distinct skill and frankly, desire to want to help others and make their knowledge and experience known and available to all of us and others. They come from a place of wanting to share and wanting to help, and the very foundation of why they're here in this community. And so I am like truly excited to have them here with you to learn and help us as a women's circle grow from the experiences that they share and learn with us. So thank you to all four of you, the Power Pack, for being here. All right, I am going to dive right in, and you can feel free to pepper us with questions through the chat thread. And, you know, I know that so many of us at BMO know Catherine Rivington, and she's been the force behind risk management, a virtual human capable of pulling down data from her data banks with the snap of her fingers. We all know her for definitely navigating all kinds of countless regulatory reviews that with such ease you'd think she were a lawyer herself, which by the way she is. But did you know that she is also on the board of the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund? Did you know that? And in addition to killing it as the head of North American Retail Credit and its chief risk officer for Canadian P&C and Wealth, that she plays hockey, and she's damn good at it, by the way, of course. Did you know that she's now taken her talents on the road and she is now the chief operating officer at BMO Wealth Management? And did you know that she's as charitable as she is brilliant? And you may not have known, but you will, like the secret's out, Catherine. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And Catherine, I know you and I have worked so closely together over the years and in my entire time at BMO, in fact. And as I reflect, one of the things that I found, we truly kind of found our way to each other because we realized we both had this strong sense to advocate for women, whether it was women in the sport of hockey, which we've spoken a lot about that, women surviving cancer, or just elevating women and giving them voice. And so can you tell us why supporting other women is just so darn important to you and where that came from? You can take yourselves off mute. Thanks.
Thanks, Lori. Hope you can hear me all right. What an introduction. Wow, thank you so much. and I'm thrilled to be here. It's my first time on one of your virtual events, and it's amazing. So really appreciate being included. You know, in terms of why supporting women is important to me, so I'd say it's like a personal kind of lifelong goal for me to contribute to a more equitable world, right? And promoting gender equality is part of that. And when I think about the world that our mothers and our grandmothers grew up in, you know, however things are for us now, we have better opportunities than they did, and that's because of a lot of women that came before. And so for me, you know, I think we need to push to continue to drive progress on a bunch of levels, but also be sure not to backslide on gains that we thought we had locked in. Like just look at U.S. reproductive rights, and so you need to have women that are fighting in terms of issues in our society, but also working to support, coach, mentor, and just energize other women in the workplace. And so you mentioned my nonprofit work outside of BMO, very much directed at sort of the systemic structural issues in society. But what I ultimately want is a more equitable world for women and girls, bankers included. And I love to be able to do that by working on it in a bunch of different ways.
Oh, I love that. You know, it starts with one, but then you take over the world, right? And good on you for having those goals and advancing us towards that. I too want an equitable world, so I love it. And I'm going to now chat a little bit about Holly. And you know, every now and again you hear a soft voice with a really large echo, and a humble human who packs a punch. And this is the case with I'm proud to call her my friend, Holly Jackson. Holly has the courage to pop up on a screen and make her first appearance at BMO during a pandemic. After leaving the comforts, right, of a 20+ year career over an employment at Capital One, where she was vice president of customer channels and people leadership, she showed up in Technicolor, no joke, as evidenced by the pink today. And I'm not being hyperbolic. She is the most colorful executive you're ever going to meet, from her Halloween earrings to her pink high heel shoes. This woman embraces fun, and she managed to connect with over 3,000 employees that she has the privilege of leading within the span of a year, and took customer service levels and employee experience levels to record highs. You know, it says something, all right, about who she is and how she does it. And she advocates for women and champions the human element in every decision. She is the proud mom of 3 rambunctious boys and hails from Oakville, Ontario. So welcome, Holly. And, one of my favorite things to do is to open up a team screen and just see what bright outfit you're wearing. So you didn't let us down. Thank you. And my proudest moment was one day I came on the screen and I looked over, and you've got this phenomenal sweater on, and I went off screen and I ran upstairs. I changed, I put it on. I had the exact same one. I was like, we go, I don't think you were proud of that. I was very proud of that.
We are
and I thought I
kindred
knew I had
spirits.
arrived. Yeah, I knew I
Yeah.
had arrived when my fashion sense rivaled yours. And so tell us, joining as you did during a pandemic, not easy, right? I think a few of us are in that boat. You had to forge new relationships, establish your leadership footprint virtually, and you couldn't rely on any of the networks you'd established. Like, how did you do that? What did you do? And like, how was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, joining November 2020, it was smack in the middle of the pandemic. And for the most part, everyone was virtual. And so there's still people that I haven't had an opportunity to meet physically face to face, although I am making sure that that number is dwindling down. One of the things I've realized is, I think a secret to my success is the personal relationships that I build, and then that allows me to actually cultivate fantastic business relationships. And the reality is, if you have goals that maybe aren't quite aligned, as long as you have a phenomenal underlying personal relationship that's built on trust, those sort of misaligned goals figure themselves out. And it actually becomes easier to drive towards a common objective. And so what I realized in the 2 years that I've been here, it's been really hard to establish those personal relationships. And then meet with someone just for the fact that they're a fantastic human and you're a fantastic human and you want to forge that relationship. And so, reflecting back on the 2 years, I would say it's probably been harder than I expected, because I didn't realize how important the personal relationships actually were until I didn't have them. And then when you sort of think, gosh, why is it taking so long to have this person kind of understand where I'm coming from? Or why doesn't this person think that I'm going, trying to solve the problem that they're trying to solve? Like, why do they think I'm coming at this from a negative side? I realize it's because they didn't know who I was as a human and didn't recognize kind of where my heart was starting from. So I've been working really, really hard to build those relationships virtually. A couple of things that I do. So number one, I try to remember the little things. So if someone happens to mention off the cuff that they've got a birthday coming up, I write it down. And then 2 weeks later, when their birthday shows up, I send them a Teams message and say, hey, happy birthday. And it just stops people in their tracks, because they're like, oh, you actually were really listening. I'm like, yeah, I really personally care. Making sure that the times that I am in person with people, like I say, let's not actually meet in the office. Let's go grab a drink. Let's go grab a coffee. Let's go have lunch. So it's more of an informal setting, so that I can really prioritize just building that solid foundation that I need in order to be, I think, that more effective leader. So it's the little things. It's starting the meetings with a personal question first. But BMO, I'm finding a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. I think part of that is just the Teams environment makes you more transactional, but I force it. Someone jumps into business, I'm like, no, too fast. Pull it back up. Wait a second. What did you do this weekend? And then they kind of stop. And then they tell me what they did this weekend. We have a great conversation, because there's always something in there that you can find a connection with. So trying to prioritize that has helped me.
Yeah, and that trust sure is the shorthand, right, between two people. And so well said. There's a lot of lesson in there. And I know, Kimberly, every now and again, you listen to someone speak, which I have it for you, to you, and I was drawn in. It was somewhere between kind of the words, the warmth, the cadence, the candor. I just felt connected. You had the ability to do that. And when I first saw you present, I thought, wow, she doesn't know it yet, but she's going to be my friend. And so, as BMO's Chief Communications and Social Impact Officer, you have made a career out of, I would say, conveying your point with passion and precision. And you're an advocate clearly for diversity, inclusion, equity, and you studied at Northwestern and were a former journalist. You serve on several nonprofit boards, and I know you're a huge advocate for education. Proud mom of 3, living in Chicago with your husband Andre, and to my new friend Kimberly, welcome. You're in for a world of fun. And for many of us, we struggle to be heard as women, and there's this constant balance that we are navigating to have our point heard while not being pushy, being straight up at the same time polite, and to speak up but not be spoken over, and God forbid not coming off as a bitch. And it really feels like a dance, like we're trying to navigate this fine line to get our point across. And so I wondered if you could share with us some experience you have on walking this tightrope and how you navigate that balance.
Well, I'm happy to do that. And I'm so excited to be here. I love the energy of this dialogue. So as part of the communications and public relations profession, we live by some principles. And so one of those principles is that you have to remain calm, patient, and good-humored in whatever it is that you do. So as I think about straddling any of the issues that we're going to talk about, one of the number one issues is staying calm and not letting others see us rattled by whatever we're experiencing. And when it comes to communication and getting your point across, I'd like to suggest that we as women can have our own principles as we think about being heard. And that really means stay calm, even when your emotions want to poke somebody in the eye because they are talking over you. Be confident and be clear. And as we do that, don't be afraid of silence. Don't be afraid of that pause to create a window to clear the runway so that all the noise, chatter, and distraction can stop and you can insert yourself confidently into the conversation. So I think the message there is to remember what we have to say and the ideas we want to convey. They are important, they matter, they need to be heard. And even if the people in the room are busy, rushing, and not necessarily on the same page, you can, with a commanding voice, not a whisper, not a shy, apologetic, oh, wait, I just want to get one more thing in the conversation, but in a confident, commanding, clear way, make your point, be heard, and don't be afraid to let a little bit of silence guide you to a place where people can actually hear you.
That's so powerful. And in that silence, you also have an opportunity to collect your breath and then draw down all the data from up on high, right? It gives you that moment of personal recalibration. Sometimes you find opportunities to work with people just because you like them. And I don't think that it's a fluke that Summer's parents named her Summer. Because if you've ever worked with Summer Hinton, you will experience an ease, an air of support, a clarity, a pacing, what Kim just said. You'll quickly feel like you're moving in the same direction and that there's not a cloud in the sky. There's an ease to it. And, if she cared to be part of the United Nations, I'm sure she'd run it. But we have the distinct privilege of calling Summer Hinton our Chief Operating Officer for Capital Markets. And this is on the heels of many other senior leadership roles that she's held, where she led regulatory reform, she's done strategic initiatives, operating strategies. She lives in the Big Apple in New York with her family. She studied, just because it was easy, maybe, biomedical engineering at Northwestern University, another graduate of Northwestern. Thank you. And it sounds about right. Summer, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lori. It's really terrific to be here. I'm almost overcome with everything that you said earlier and everything the other ladies have said. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think about your background, engineering, cap markets. It's tough. Like, it's a tough male-dominated space. Can you help us understand firstly, like, what that feels like to be sometimes and often the only female in the room, the issues you faced, and in that environment, how'd you manage through them, and what's it feel like, and what's it leave you wanting more of and less of?
Thank you for the question. It often feels like the brink of insanity, honestly. it's felt different through different parts of my career. I would say early on, I did everything I could to be seen as and treated as one of the guys. I dressed like a guy. I talked like a guy. I drank like a guy. And then I got a little further in my career and I was pretty frustrated with the fact that I was recognized as a guy and assimilated as a guy. And I started to feel like maybe that wasn't the right approach for me. And then I got a little further in my career and came to realize that there's tremendous power in diversity and having the diverse perspective in the room. And there are some parts that are terrific and some parts that are a burden. I would say that it's always hard to be the only one, to seek out the other diverse voices that are in the room with you. And often, I would say two things. One, men are not the enemy. What is the enemy are the things that we whisper to ourselves and the system itself. And I'm always struck by how much trepidation I have to say something about being a woman and bring my point of view to the table. But then the reaction from the men never ceases to amaze me because it's simply something that went by them. And once I've drawn attention to it, they're like, oh my God, how could we do something like that? Mm-hmm. So speak up would be the most important thing I've learned. Speak up and be authentic, and don't be afraid. Take a deep breath and say it.
That's incredible advice. And I know that we do bend ourselves into some unnatural positions to fit in, right? Before we find our stride and before we realize that we fit in from the start. But it's tapping in and grabbing that voice. And I know that that before we get into the thick of it, I wanted to hear from each of you on what the 3 things are that make you each remarkable. And I know there's way more than 3, and I get that it's really uncomfortable to say it, but humility be damned. I'm going to start with you, Holly.
Sure. Yeah, this was a tough one, and I did use part of my family power pack to help validate that I was on the right track. And interestingly, my son and my husband came up with very similar ones. So I guess these really are the things that make me remarkable. So I would say number 1 is my positive outlook on things. So I can always reframe something to find the silver lining or what's good. Number 2, I would say, is my passion and caring for other people, or my thoughtfulness, which is how my husband worded it. And number 3 is my ability to get a shit ton of stuff done in a very short period of time.
Oh, remarkable superpowers. Kimberly.
Well, I make time for people. And I think that I've learned that there's no greater investment than another human being. So whether it's family, friends, coworkers, strangers, I make time, not knowing where people are or what they might need. I also like the data. I'm a caregiver and I care really deeply. And I am a mother of 3. I'm a caregiver for my mom and my grandmother. And while I don't always view it as like a duty that was instilled in me, I feel like it's an honor. And it has taught me so much about organizing my life in all kinds of ways that I think that care and concern has served me really well. And then I just love to and think that I'm remarkable as a passionate storyteller. I feel very blessed to have fallen in love with something personally that I get a lot of joy from, that I translated into a profession. And I think that storytelling is so powerful as a way of helping people to be seen and heard, to really move things that matter. And I think that's incredible that it's such a big part of my life, both personally and professionally.
I love that. Summer.
I don't know whether I love or hate that you asked this question, Lori, but I'll go with it's a good one. So 3 things. 1, I'm stubborn as hell. Stubborn as a mule. I always have been, and I always will be, and anyone that deals with me would know that. Number 2, in spite of that, I'm deeply empathetic, which is both a blessing and a curse. I don't always act on it, but I see it and I feel it. And then the 3rd thing, which my boss laughs about constantly because capital markets is chaotic and full of people that shoot from the hip. I am a very disciplined planner, very disciplined.
I love that you said that you coach stubbornness as what makes you remarkable and a favorable attribute versus something that isn't. That in of itself is interesting, right? And you need a bit of grit right? As a girl and a woman to survive. Catherine.
All right. Well, number one, very strong values, values driven. So fairness, truth, loyalty, and that tends to translate into wanting good things to happen for good people. So I'm usually coming from the right place and I'll make decisions based on those values. I think the second one is that I'm fearless about a challenge. I'm usually up for anything and I'll give it a go. And then the last one is that I find humor in everything. I don't take myself too seriously, and even in dark times, you can ask my risk management colleagues. There's usually something to giggle about. So those are my three.
Oh, love it. I've witnessed that humor, so thank God for that. We've been in dark times. So, kudos to all of you for admitting it. Honestly, I know you're remarkable. We see that you're remarkable, but we don't say it often enough, and it doesn't come with a lot of ease, right? And it's not that there's not self-confidence in us, but it's tough to draw out. And so this brings me to a point about advocating for oneself and stating what you're good at and what you want and what you're willing to accept and what you're not, borrowing off of Women by the Numbers and boundary setting. And we've all come to this point, I think, differently perhaps in our lives. But Catherine, I've always appreciated your very thoughtful nature, your analytical and often quiet way of conveying your point. And I found it to be very impactful. But when you speak, I notice people listen, including myself. And even though you choose often not to be the dominant person in the room, as a fellow introvert and kind of knowing many women who are trying to be heard, how do you do it, and what do you think about when you're making that choice to speak up and be heard?
Thanks, Lori, as a fellow introvert, for pointing out the positive side of this, that people do listen. But I got to tell you, this is the type of thing you get criticized for as a woman, and I have. So that Jacinda Ardern quote that was running off the top about not being aggressive enough, I've heard that before. But I do think that there's room for different approaches. I am an introvert. I tend to think and do a little bit of analysis and support something I'm going to say with some facts and some evidence, and so that tends to be why there's quality behind what's being said. But I also actually, something that Kimberly said really resonated. Like there's power in silence. There's also power in listening. And so those of us who ask good questions, leave space for other people, listen not just to what they're saying, but how they're saying it. There's an awful lot of information that you can pick up that I think you can find to be a really useful tool as well. So I have no regrets for using all those tools, and I'm happy to be listened to. So
yeah, and you use them well. And Kimberly, in our ElleExcel sessions, we've explored the challenges of being a woman in male-dominated space and how to find your voice, establish your place, all while remaining true to ourselves. And your experience as a woman of color in a male-dominated space further amplifies that. And I wondered if you could candidly describe what that feels like to us, what we need to better appreciate about the uniqueness of all of those situations that you're in.
Yes, well, I'm going to jump right to the most important point that I want to convey to everyone on the line. And it is something that is just genuinely heartfelt and has to be said. And that really is to my white women. We need you to be supporters of women of color actively. There are times when the intersection between gender and race and ethnicity gets a little lost. And there are times when there are lots of movements to advance women, and that can benefit white women and leave women of color behind. And so it's so very important that every single one of us are intentional, and particularly my colleagues who are not women of color, to find your way of more deeply understanding what is the experience and how does it differ from my experience in ways that you can be helpful. The example I'd pick is when you started out, Lori, and you talked about how sometimes people can be perceived as bitchy, and we as women have to be careful. There is a stereotype of angry Black women that many of us have to cope with when we are trying to advance our ideas and get things done. And I remember when I was in exactly that situation, really being very passionate about an issue that mattered. And if you remember those principles about being calm and good natured and all of that that drive my profession, the idea that I would be in a meeting behaving in a way that could be perceived as angry is probably pretty hard to envision. But this woman came to me and she says, I didn't feel like I could approach you. You were so angry. You just came up, and she must have said it 3 times, and I could tell you my head was about to explode.
And you were angry.
I was about to become angry, but again, I am calm, cool, and collected. And I think the point there is what you experience in the workplace, we experience, and then some. There's an added layer that comes when people aren't quite sure you belong in the room or aren't quite sure you are up to the task. And so it's just going to be so important that we are very intentional as we advance and advocate for women, that we do that for all women. I'm in another organization that does very similar to what we are doing here. And we have a credo. It's called How Women Lead. And that credo, there are 4 points. Be fierce advocates for each other. Be unabashedly visible, say yes to helping each other, and reinforce her voice, whether she's in the room and being dismissed or not in the room, and people are taking advantage of that. So for me, as we think about navigating this male dominant world, one of the most important things is we need to be in it together, and we need all of us being very intentional about advocating for all women.
Oh, I love it. You know what? There's so many pearls of wisdom in there. And just the fact that we're together here on a screen, and then also having the courage to stand up when someone is being judged or they're not being heard, or you're stronger together. And sometimes all it takes is a little pat or a wink or a, yeah, I agree with what Catherine said. Summer.
I believe in everything you just said, Kimberly.
Yeah.
I need some advice beyond be true, be supportive, like be specific. What can we do? We're here, we will do it, and we will be committed to it. Help us learn what we need to do.
So for one, if you are in environments, whether it's organizations, structures, and you don't see women of color there, let's try and figure out what we can do to get them to the table. And if you see a woman of color in a room and she's the one or only, get to know her and ask about her journey. If people are new to the organization, reach out, welcome them, help them navigate, help them learn what you learned. So there are those kinds of things that I think can be helpful. And if you hear or see bias or microaggressions in action, speak up, whether it's for women of color or any other group.
Yeah, and speaking of microaggressions, they're often kind of these cleverly concealed, but they exist, right? And they serve to marginalize women and others. But Holly, I wondered if you could share with us an example of when you faced, obviously not naming names, but to just give us a little bit more tangible examples, and the stuff Summer's searching for too, where we can see how they might manifest. And please tell us, if you could too, like what you did in that moment, after the moment. What did it teach you? What did you wish you did? And what did you learn from the situation?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And, it's a topic that's hard to talk about. So like, if any of you could feel my heart right now, like the moment you used the word microaggression, then turned it to me, like I started to like have like little palpitations because it's real and all of us deal with it. And it frankly, it really sucks. And so let me give you just a personal experience I had. And then what I tried to do for myself, but also then what my kind of commitment was for everyone else, because I don't want people to have to feel sort of what I felt in the moment. And so, microaggressions can show up in a bunch of different ways. It could be gender-based, or it could be the job family that I'm in. Operations isn't as fun and sexy as some other types of job families are. So when I show up at the table and I'm speaking, it's, my stuff isn't as fun to talk about, or maybe it's not as credible. Sometimes the results that I bring forward are questioned because do I really have the analytical power to actually be really saying that? And, one of my biggest fears growing up and even to this day is for people around the table to not think that I'm credible and to not think that I'm competent. And so for me, a really challenging microaggression is when someone questions what I've said. but doesn't question it in a way of curiosity and learning, but questions it in a way to be demeaning and to be disrespectful. And so I had an example last year at BMO at a very senior table where someone around the table asked me point blank if I knew the definition of a word. And clearly I knew the definition of the word. They asked me the question and they proceeded to define it for me. And that was in front of a lot of very senior people. And it wasn't going to add any value. It was meant to be a, let me put her back in her place. Let me shove her under the table. Let me show that I'm the big person at the room. And so right in that moment, calm Kimberly, I channeled my inner Kimberly, even though I didn't know what it was. I was calm. I kept my emotions at bay. My heart was going to like pound through my chest and I wanted to like crawl in the corner and scream. But I had 35 minutes left of this meeting that I was the chair of. So I focused on the facts. I focused on what we needed to do and I moved the conversation forward. But coming out of that conversation, I had a couple of reflections. Number one, never ever transfer your power to the person that's doing the microaggression. The moment that I allowed that person to see how upset I was, or to make me, get all flustered or to turn me off of my game, I had transferred that power. So I kept that power and I didn't let the comment, screw me up and prevent me from moving forward. And number two, it forced me to personally reflect when I walked out of there, because I realized words are so powerful. And when you use a word, especially as a more senior person, that word can be so damaging. And so I really took a moment to think about, how do I say things? What do I say? What am I trying to do? And trying to be more inclusive. But then to flip it around to sort of say, hey, when I see something like this happening in the moment, what should I do about it? And there's a couple of things that I'm trying to do more of now, because it's terrible to watch it happen. But for me in that moment, what was almost just as bad as the action was that no one else in the room stood up for me. No one else actually said, hey, wait a minute, that was completely offside. And there were a few people I spoke to afterwards, and I said, you know what, your bystander apathy was just as bad. And, there's reasons why people were choosing not to engage. But I swore to myself, I won't be that person. And so in the moment, I think there's ways that we can actually turn the conversation, because the microaggression is coming from a place of, whether it's concern or nervousness, or there could be something completely different going on that has nothing to do with me. And so in that room, right then and there, stopping and saying, oh, I'm sensing that maybe you have a different perspective. Can we hear your point of view? Or can you reword your question in a way that would allow us to understand, how we could explain things differently? Try to engage them in the conversation, but in a slightly different way. The other spot that I'm trying to do is actually finding ways to support the person who's speaking. And so, Lori, for example, if you're doing a presentation and I see that the questions are kind of taking it down a different path, actually asking a question that takes it in the other path, finding a way to bring it back to the purpose of what we're trying to do, or reinforcing, hey, Lori, I just heard you say that point. That's a really good point. And I agree with that because. So trying in the moment to create some allyship for the person in the room to sort of give a little bit more, support for them. And then the last thing that I try to do is honestly, the person that did the microaggression in the moment, finding them later, one-on-one. And first of all, just asking a very human question. Are you okay? Do you need help? Is there something going on that you want to talk about? Assuming they're not trying to be a bad person, because everyone has greatness in their heart. And maybe that person just needs a helping hand. So finding a way to say, can I help you? And if they're like, no, everything's fine, it's all good, there's no problem, then actually giving them direct feedback. Hey, you know what? In that moment, that wasn't okay. Here's what I saw. Here's what I felt. And my encouragement would be to try to change it or do something different. So I think we have to name these things. We have to call them out. We have to not be afraid in the moment to say, like, wait a minute, where are you trying to go with that question? Or wait a minute, that actually wasn't okay. So that together as a group, we can learn.
Yeah, and part of the reason I wanted to ask it of this kind of cast of very senior women is that I think it's it's false to think that you get to a certain point and then suddenly the sky opens up and none of these things exist. I think there's the reality that some of them are kind of culturally just in the fiber, and that to disrupt the culture, it takes calling out, it takes bystanders assisting. I think you had bystander empathy, I saw in the chat thread, as you called it. It takes like a community of others to go, you know what, we're better than that. You're better than that. I deserve more than that. We are better than that, the royal we, and not let that persist. And so, I mean, your example, and thank you for, I know that's hard to share, but I think more useful to others, that they can learn from that and get some tools on you. There's a bunch of tips on the thread on how to manage for that. And speaking of boundaries, I think we're tracing around this subject of boundaries. Sometimes we'll call it a microaggression or a boundary, or both. And Summer, I'm curious, like how you came to know your own boundaries, like what they were, what you'd accept, what you just like was off the table, were they tested? Like, can you, has anyone told you that maybe they're not acceptable? And what did you learn by overstepping?
So your story really resonated with me, Lori, around a life of service and then being frustrated and boundaries, as I'm sure it resonated with a lot of other people too. So up until very recently, I didn't have good boundaries. I would do anything for anyone at any time. Part of it is, I think, how myself as a woman was raised, my family construct. All of us have trauma in our background, regardless of who we are, where we came from, that molds and shapes us. It honestly wasn't until after I had my son almost a year ago, and frankly started therapy, that I even started to think about what boundaries mean and what it means and how important it is to take care of myself as a human who needs things and not give it all away. And so it's still very much a work in progress for me. And it's a very new like conversation, because I would say I went from having like no boundaries, I'll do anything for anyone, give it all away, to having like angry boundaries,
Sometimes
rageful boundaries.
I get it.
And now sort of rebalancing to say, you know, what are my boundaries and why? And I think it wasn't until I kind of like, I'm like sort of a disciplined planner, until I sat down and did the math around priorities and like wrote things down for myself into a little framework, that I really started to get a handle on what my boundaries are and why. And I have to repeat them to myself constantly. Like the philosophy has to be repeated to myself constantly, because I'm very new at this. So I've got a lot of work to do. I don't know that that's very helpful as a role model for boundaries.
And I think you're getting shout outs too for talking about therapy and help. And I've seen a therapist for like 20 years, and it's good, because I think you raise concepts that you never really before understood, and somebody holds up a mirror and allows you to see a better version of yourself. So it's very, it shapes who you are and who you want to ultimately become, and the point where you recognize where you get energy from. So good on you. I mean, that takes courage while you're juggling all that you are. And congratulations, by the way, Mom. And then I wondered, Kimberly, if I could direct that same question to you. So just a refresher, it's like, you know, how did you come to know your boundaries, and what did you learn about boundaries along the way?
So my story is a little different in that I have worked all of my life, from a very early age. So I had to have this coexistence of a work hard, play hard kind of mindset, because if you're like 13 or 14 years old and you're working, you're still a kid and you want to play. And so I always just developed from a very early age this commitment to work hard, play hard, get your work done, then you can do fun stuff. And so I didn't ask for permission really as a kid, because I knew what the expectations were and I knew what I needed to do. And so as a professional, I just went into the professional work world, like not asking for permission for this journey of work-life balance and setting boundaries. So instead, what, I had to commit to is I knew what was important to me, to be able to contribute and grow in my career, while also being able to have a personal life. And this was well before I had children, but as Summer said, it intensified when the small people came. But at the end of the day, I only worked for companies that had an environment that afforded me the ability to take time off. I only worked for bosses who understood my value system and what mattered to me, and I made choices about where I chose to be or not be based on that. For me, work-life balance isn't, can I take a vacation once a year? It's about, can I leave work at work and go to my kid's game and not be texting somebody during the game?
Mm.
And, I certainly think women, we can have it all. We can't always have it at the same time. But I think setting clear expectations is how I choose to look at it, which is the same as setting clear boundaries, has really been the way that I've managed that. Bottom line, it's very personal. It's different for every human being. So every single one of us has to define what's important to us and make our way and set those expectations. And if the pressure is too great for you to be who you are, where you are not in the right place. And
Yeah,
so you've
really.
got to make tough choices about being where you can have the boundaries, the expectations that you want for the life that you want.
So well said. Lots of quotable quotes there and good practical advice. And I wondered, I'm going to turn to each of you for a bit of rapid fire on this one, is that what do you wish women would do more of, and what do you think we should do less of? Holly.
Yeah, I would say we should do more of just going for it. Stop putting barriers in front of your way. If there's something that you want to do, don't come up with the reasons of why you can't do it. Come up with the reasons of why you can and just go and do it. And then I would say do less of looking in the mirror and saying it's something else's problem as to why you're not successful. You got to look in the mirror. You got to take control back. You got to figure out why it's not working and change it so it'll work. I think everyone has the potential to drive things forward, and looking elsewhere and saying it's someone else's fault or something else's fault as to why it won't work. You got to stop doing that. Look in the mirror and figure out how you can make it work.
Love that. Summer.
I think we have to be less afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, not being perfect, not being 180% qualified for a job before we put up our hands. I think sometimes we all just need to take a breath and take a leap.
I totally agree. Love that. Catherine.
Summer stole my answer. I'm going to add to it. You did it, Summer. I knew you would. No, I was going to say things we should do more, asking for opportunities. I'm going to throw it out there. If you're 50% qualified, you just go get it, girl. Like, just ask for that opportunity, and then you'll be noticed, and maybe it's the next one that comes your way. And stop doing less apologizing.
Love it. Kimberly.
Advocate for yourself. So all of you should torture yourself and identify the 3 things that are remarkable, that make you remarkable, because you need to be able to advocate for yourself. Women do not do it enough. Advocate for what you want. On the stop beating ourselves up when we make a mistake. At the end of the day, every single human being makes mistakes. You make a mistake, you learn from it, you move on, quit beating ourselves up and making it the worst thing in the world that could ever happen, and the world is not going to come to an end.
Yeah, 90's the new 100. We had a session on that. I'm with you on that one. And I would add to that, it's just when you see another woman going out there and doing something, however modest, give her a boost. Like, chances are she showed up that day and she changed 4 times before she actually settled on an outfit, that she believed she looked fat, that she showed up and said something, said, oh, I wish I'd said something different. Like, it's a very, we're real hard, right, on ourselves, but a whisper from someone and a level of encouragement, a smile, a check-in does a world of good. Right, in a world where you feel a whole ton of pressure. So I love all of your answers, and thank you for sharing them. I'm going to pivot a wee bit to this concept of this power pack, and this women's circle clearly is all about bringing together what I'll say is like a constellation of support, and for sure that includes people, right? It includes many of you on the screen. It's like getting those women into your power pack. But when we talk about that, could you share with us like who's in your power pack and who's in your community of support? People, practitioners, like where do you go to and what do you do to refuel and get back to who you are and feel level? Catherine.
So I'm happy to say I have a very supportive husband who's kind of a home cheerleader and coach. I have a lot of friends at BMO too, a lot of women, but you know, I'm proud to have a lot of the same friends that I had growing up. Actually, I have my best friend is someone I met when I was 10 years old, and most of my friends are kind of know me more than 25 years. And so what you end up with is a pretty kind of diverse community of support, mostly non-bankers, coming from different kind of, spaces and personal experiences. And I find that helps keep me grounded, is just talking to people that are not in our specific environment all the time. So that would be my power pack.
Yeah, it sure does. And I think like we judge our one another by their behaviors, but ourselves by our intent. And so when you anchor into somebody who clearly knows you, like knows your roots, you got both of those things going on. Like they know. They're going to see it. They're going to go, you're better than that. But they're also going to understand, I know where you're coming from, and write you and help you improve. So I love that. Holly.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I learned later in life that I wish I had understood earlier on is how powerful it is to actually ask for help. I think when I was, first in the workplace and just graduated, I thought asking for help would show that you didn't know what you were doing and would make you vulnerable. And I didn't think vulnerable was a good thing because it's not a masculine trait. And, Summer, to paraphrase you, like I grew up thinking you got to act like a man. And so asking for help wasn't a good idea. And fortunately, I've come to realize that is the stupidest thing that anybody could ever think. And asking for help is so, so important and valuable. And guess what? There's so many people in the world that want to help you. So I'm very lucky, like Catherine. I have a fantastic and supportive family. My husband and my kids. When I need a smile on my face, I find one of them, and they love me to death, and they think that I am just a rock star. And so when I don't feel like a rock star, I find them, and they make me feel like a rock star. But then I have different groups or different sort of friends or mentors along the way from different companies that, it depends what I need, but I know that they're sort of a lifeline in lots of different places. And every once in a while, it's just a reminder that I just have to go and just ask for it. And then there's so many people that will, open up their hearts and their minds and their time to give me the support that I need.
Yeah, Stephanie in the thread said that asking for help is a superpower. I would totally agree with that. Summer.
So much like Catherine, I have a few different circles of power packs. My friends that have known me forever are the ones that keep me honest. My BMO friends are the ones that I can just talk in shorthand to. They know, they feel it, they understand. They are the ones that give really good feedback. And I would say that, we started with this. The first thing you said to me was about being a woman in a male-dominated environment is sometimes being alone. It's incredibly important to have the women around you. Like the few other women that share the room with you have to be part of your power pack. And I would say that those on a day-to-day basis are the most important women in my life. They may not be my best friends. They may not be like family. Sometimes I may not agree with them and may not like them, but we always need each other and we always support each other both before, after, and during the meeting, no matter how hard it is. And that to me is what a real powerful pack does for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Kimberly.
So I have a power pack of supporters from every organization I work in. And I like that because the external perspectives that come from people that are in different places dealing with different challenges is really just critically important. But my superpower pack are my kids. If you want to be grounded and have a humbling experience, let young people share insight, wisdom, and perspective with you. So I love the multi-generational power pack that fuels my being. My young people, my children, and their friends introduce me to new things. They advance my thinking. They've helped me be more progressive in ways and not be stuck. And then I can talk to my 97-year-old grandmother, and she gives me a whole different set of perspective. So I just think there's so much power and value in multi-generational relationships for knowledge, for support, for wisdom, for learning, for reflection. So they are a true power pack for me.
Yeah, really well said. We explored here last time raising young women to excel, and then sort of younger women as well as parents and different perspectives. And there indeed was what you said, learning from all ends, right? I think if you're open to learning, it can come from anywhere. And, one of the things when I'm coaching or helping women, I disclose things that I myself am unsure of. I think this whole format is an illustration of that. And I never used to be good at it, nor was I comfortable with it. But you know, about how that feels to say, show up in a meeting and not feel like I'm at the top of my game, or describe what it feels like to be unsure of myself and lack confidence. And I'm very surprised to learn that many women are shocked that I feel that way at all. They assume that because you've gotten to a certain place or a certain level or have a job, that somehow you've, quote, mastered it, you know, like, or tamed the dragon, so to speak. And I hope you're seeing today that that's not the case. It's not that we don't think we've arrived to a certain place, each of us, but do you ever feel unsure? And when you do, I think I know the answer to that, but what do you do in advance of that moment? What do you do in that moment? What do you do following that moment to sort of tame that inner dragon so that you can show up and be your best self, but also not beat yourself up for it? Catherine.
Well, I have to confess that, you know, when it comes to important meetings, I'm usually well prepared or slightly over prepared, right? And I think this is a well kept secret. And I can tell you, I've been behind the scenes enough watching senior people in action to know that person that you think is concisely and articulately presenting and taking Q&A from everywhere and just smiling and making it look easy. It's easy because they've really prepared, and that's at the top levels of our organization and beyond, right? So that's thing number one. But that doesn't mean I don't feel performance anxiety in different situations. So I was thinking about what I do. So thing number one is like seeing if you can change the circumstances, right? You know, if you're not ready to present something or have a conversation, could you reshape the agenda? Could you reschedule the meeting? Could you set expectations to say that this is going to be a preliminary discussion, wanted to share some ideas for feedback, and I'll come back. So kind of changing like the context. Thing number two would be getting some perspective, which is that it's extremely rare that any particular interaction or moment in time is going to kind of destroy your brand and ruin your career. It's just one thing. You can have a bad day, a bad meeting, a bad interaction. So it's not usually in the world. And then the last one's to breathe, because breathing is great and it just calms you down. Get an Apple Watch, know your heart rate, bring it down through your breathing. These are all good, good strategies to manage anxiety.
Yeah. Really well said. And I've seen that with you, where there's a level of preparedness, which is great. And then in moments when you don't, those are some good tips. Thanks. Summer, how about you?
Well, I think you can never go wrong with faking an illness and canceling. In all seriousness, I do think that there is something to be said for simply pulling the plug. And I used to not do that often enough, but the reality is if you're not prepared, you're going to waste the other person's time as well as your own. So why not be honest? If you're obligated though and can't weasel your way out of it, I do think that preparing as much as possible, listening, asking questions, reading the room, incredibly important. To Catherine's point, breathe, stall a little bit. But I also think that whatever you say and do, you are your worst enemy and your worst critic. Can almost guarantee that the other person or people in the room are not hanging on your every word. They're not marking you for context and grammar. They're thinking about themselves. They're thinking about what else they have going on in their lives, and the stakes are really just not that high. So again, you just take a breath, take a leap, make your way through it.
I've also
and
just
do better
said,
next
you know
time.
what, I don't know. Like I said it often. I'm like, I don't know. And then I've said, I really should know. Bad on me. I'm gonna go away and find out. And people are generally fairly kind. Firstly, it's the truth in those situations. Otherwise, I would say the answer. But you know, you're often in an unenviable position in an analytics role where you're having to pull a fact out of thin air about 13 businesses, 2 countries, anything. Like, you just cannot hold it all. I cannot hold it all. And so I will just do a mea culpa, you know, don't know, you know, and then I start coughing and I'm like, whoa, gotta go. I think I got COVID. That's right, Summer. That's your secret's out. All right. So I'm going to ask a question of Holly and then Kimberly. Is that what is like this, call it a new normal, right? Given everything you know where you've come from, what does this sort of new normal look like for women in the workforce? And what do you hope it to be? Holly?
Yeah, when I think about what I hope it will be, to me, we've achieved the goal when we see a senior woman that's gotten a new role, that's gotten promoted, that's become CEO of one of the big 5, and the first thing that pops into our head is, that is amazing. She is going to do a fantastic job.
Mm.
Not, oh, I guess she got it because she's a woman. And I think the fact that that's still, that narrative is still out there means we're not at the new norm yet. We still need to have the targets to demonstrate that we're making progress. But to me, we will have reached the top when that's not even a thought that would enter someone's mind.
Mm.
It's the right person who got the job. That's why they're in their job. And gosh, it's going to be amazing to see them do the best thing that they can do. So that's what I think about it in terms of have we made it or not.
I love that. Because there's bias underneath the hood of that, and you unravel the
Mm.
bias, and all you're left with is she's gonna rock it. Love it. Kimberly.
So as we continue to navigate this hybrid world, I would say that women are going to have to be very intentional about being visible and about building relationships to support our careers. There's just stuff that happens when you are in person, after the meeting, down the hall, at the bar, that don't happen after Zoom and Teams calls in the same way. So it's not enough if we are able to just be super successful at navigating our jobs through technology. We've got to be very intentional about finding ways to deepen relationships, to make sure we're not forgotten, to make sure that we are engaged with folks who have the ability to influence what's next. My hope for the future is that to the point that just came up about biases, is that my daughters and their generation will not have to spend as much time as I did, energy in my career, helping people be comfortable with difference, or having to talk about fitting in or conforming the way some are described, trying to make people feel okay or educated about what's offensive or not offensive. At the end of the day, if I had $1 for every hour I've had to spend throughout my career over and over again as you move to new organizations and different individuals, it is draining. It's a second job. And my hope is that women and people of color and women of color will not have to spend as much energy on that in the future, and they can focus on being and performing and living.
Oh, yes. Got it. And I'm going to put Summer and Catherine, if you want to weigh in on this one, you're welcome to. But the question is really around, what to you does this new normal look like for women? Like, what do you hope for?
I
Catherine.
hope that we don't, sorry, go first. Sorry,
No,
Catherine.
not at all. Please
Go
go.
ahead. I hope that we can spend less time forgiving ourselves and forgiving other people for stepping on us. To me, that would be remarkable.
Sure would. Catherine.
I think my answer is similar to Holly, that talent is viewed with without bias, that the traits that might be seen as traditionally feminine are valued appropriately. Like just that we're able to operate in the world with less bias and more kind of equal opportunity. And Kimberly, totally take your point that people's experience is an intersection of traits, and it's not all the same for everybody. And so this for me is about all diversity categories.
Got it. All right. Question for all of you. What are the two things you do to care for yourself, like self-care? Holly.
I spend as much time outside as I can. Blue sky and sun on my face is so important. And then I read a good book, like immersing myself in someone else's story. Fiction, getting lost allows me to clear my mind.
Not good advice. Kimberly.
I hydrate a lot. I don't drink any coffee or tea. I just drink water all day. And I think that's so important to nurture both your physical being. So I think fitness is really important mentally and physically. And to be honest, I don't deny myself very often when it's something I really want. So at the end of the day, I care for a lot of people. I make sure that their needs are met. So if I feel like getting on a plane, buying a new handbag, or locking myself in my room for several hours, I do it. because I listen to my body and my spirit when it needs to be charged. And that's the best way I think I can take care of self.
Oh, smart. Way to go. Summer.
I do one thing and only one thing that is just for me, and I protect it at all costs. Back to what I said earlier, I go to therapy every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. I don't care if hell was raining down. I would still go every morning, every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. I hope no one ever tries to contact me at that time because I'm not available.
You know, good for you. Firstly, for I think you saw it in the thread, for the courage to admit it, and then for ring fencing it, and there's no shame in it. It's a support structure. It is part of the power pack when we were talking about it as a circle a few weeks ago, and it matters, right? And good for you for recognizing that those are the things that that help keep you level. Amazing, Catherine.
Well, I'm not going to try to schedule meetings with Summer on Wednesdays at 8 a.m. That's for sure. For me, so I'm into sports. I like running in nature especially. So that's a big one. But it was pointed out to me that the sports thing is good. It's a stress release, but your body and your mind are still doing work. And I needed something that was just to relax, that wasn't like, like energy burning like that. So I've been doing restorative yoga when I can, which is the laziest type of yoga, like a sack of potatoes on the floor kind of thing. And it's just fantastic. So trying to do that as often as I can, which is a couple times a month.
Yeah, I like to open up my door and scream at my neighbors. No judgment. It's a good thing none of you are my neighbors. I'm just kidding. But I mean, I journal it out, right? I'm writing like if whatever it is, whatever emotion I have, good, bad, ugly, set my day with intention, and then I bookend it in the evenings. I am writing it all out of my system and ideate that way. And I find that for me, that really works. And just rounding this all out, who do you look for to define what's possible for women? It could be someone who's passed. It could be someone who's been in your life, alive or not, famous or not, in plain sight around you. What's kind of your North Star of what the heck's possible here, Holly?
Yeah, I would say it's not one person. What I try to do is look at the women that are making a difference and learn from or pick up something from them. So if you think about names like Michelle Obama or Jacinda Ardern, who had a quote that was circling, she took a ton of courage to do the announcement that she did last week. Cynthia Marshall, the first female CEO in the NBA, she is driving massive change in a holistically male-dominated culture. But then even going way, way back, Rosa Parks, she didn't even know she was using her intersectionality to drive massive change. So to me, it's looking at all of these amazing, amazing females and thinking about how did they figure out that they could do that? And what courage did it take and what did they actually do? And then you put all of those little pieces together and you get a pretty phenomenal model to work towards.
Amazing. Thank you, Kimberly.
I would agree. I don't know that there's any one person, but when you look at the stories of overcoming that so many women, whether they are the phenomenal women that Holly mentioned or the women we see in the workplace that today are overcomers, that are people sitting at tables for the first time and the onlys, I just get energy from women who just keep fighting, that are just persevering, overcoming, paving the way in a very unselfish way for those that will come behind. And that's what gives me hope for my daughters. And so I am very grateful for all of you that are in this audience that are doing that so that my girls and everyone else will have even more opportunity than we've had.
Perfect. Summer.
I would agree with Holly and Kimberly. I don't have one singular role model, and I think that the key traits have changed over time. Although this will sound very shallow and pandering, I will say that I've taken great strength and great advice from this today in hearing all of you. Like, it actually has been it's been really moving. And I am going to walk away with different things. And I think that's, like, to me, that's the most important thing, is constantly learning and evolving what I individually think good looks like, to always be pushing forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Well, I think what I realized on this one that my definition of what's really successful has changed probably in recent years. And if you had asked me 5 years ago, it probably would have been more accomplished oriented, right? Some of the amazing trailblazers, and like there's certainly much to be impressed about and inspired by. But I think for me, like the North Star has got to be someone who's, you know, chasing their dreams, but doing it on their terms in a balanced way where they're also prioritizing their health and other priorities that they may have. And you just don't know from the outside looking in whether those really incredible accomplished women, do they have the life that they want, or did they chase the one thing for all of us? But so I think what I want for myself and for all the folks on this call is that you find that balance that works for you, and it doesn't have to be accomplishments at the expense of everything else.
Yeah, and Wonder Women are in plain sight. You know, all you need to do is open your eyes and you're going to come across one, no question. And you'll see from the chat thread that the four of you were called out as that inspiration and that North Star. So I think it for those, there are many of you who already know the four of you, and there are others who just had a chance to meet you today. And I gave you a world of compliments for making yourself vulnerable, for sharing your story, for the good, the bad, the ugly of it, the advice of it, the pains of it, because I don't think there is any other path forward for us collectively as women to move forward and move past some of these things without that understanding. It's organic and it's changing and it's evolving, and there's a community of people around you who look up to you, and there are 400 some odd folks on the line who are the benefit of your wisdom and your bruises and your dreams. So thank you for that.